Let us call to order this special session of the Bloomington Common Council for this evening. This is Wednesday, April the 27th, and we will begin by asking our clerk to please call the roll.
Councilmember Rosenberger? Here. Volin? Sims?
Here.
Scambalori? Sandberg?
Here.
Rallo?
Here.
Flaherty?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
And Piedmont Smith?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to summarize this evening, we are discussing legislation for second readings and resolution. This is Resolution 22-09, the resolution proposing an ordinance to modify the Monroe County local income tax rate, allocate the additional revenues to economic development, and cast votes in favor of the ordinance. This evening is a continuation of our session last week. And because of a special circumstance, we have one of our members who cannot join us in person. And so therefore, it is likely that we will hold a discussion this evening that could include a presentation from the staff if they are here and prepared to do that. If not, where we left off last week was to begin with any council questions that we may have before we give an opportunity to go to the public. Anyone out who has joined us via Zoom will have an opportunity to sign in, raise their hand, and make public comment again this evening before we come back to the Common Council, who will then have an opportunity to make any kind of closing statements they wish to make or additional questions if at the end of public comment there are more questions that are brought up. And then at that point, we may have a motion to postpone again to our next session because of the fact that no vote can be taken this evening, or it might not be prudent for a vote to be taken without all 9 members present. I don't know if if Mr. Lucas, if you want to provide any more detail on what I have just laid out, or.
Good summary. I will just note that this proposal has a particular voting process because this is a resolution of the Bloomington City Council to propose an ordinance to the Monroe County Tax Council. So in addition to a resolution of this body that you all are voting on, you're also casting votes for the ordinance of the Tax Council. And that procedure includes you all being able to cast your votes on the Tax Council individually. So I think Council President Sandberg mentioned to allow each member an opportunity to cast their votes. It may be the will of the council to wait until all 9 of you are present.
Very good. Now I see up on our screen that the mayor is with us via Zoom, and Beth Kate, I assume, are there other members of the staff who are going to be joining us via Zoom in case there are any questions?
Madam President?
Yes.
Point of information.
Yeah.
If memory serves, at our regular session last week, we already did presentation, questions, and public comment, and we're back to council debate.
All right.
We can repeat those steps if that's the plan, I suppose. I was just wanting to clarify.
Thank you. So without further ado, let us go to council for questions. And again, we have a number of staff who are with us via Zoom who can answer any questions that we may have. Councilmember Sims.
I just have a point of order. Is the mayor here to present this evening?
As we just heard, we are continuing the meeting from last week, so there's no need for any kind of formal introduction. I don't believe we can go right to council. Any further questions council may have?
I was just wondering if he might have had something to add since last Wednesday, but that's fine. We can go on with council
The questions
debate.
may may allow him an opportunity to
Okay, thank you.
step up. Thank you. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I'd like to know whether there is a surplus balance in the city's PS Lit funds, any accumulation over the past 6 years since we've had the PS Lit.
All right. Is there anyone from the staff who wants to take that question from Councilmember Piedmont Smith? Controller Jeff Underwood.
Jeff Underwood, City Controller. as a reminder, we get two pieces of the public safety lit because we manage the PSAP, the central dispatch. We get PS lit funding for that first, and then the remainder falls down to the 4 units of government, the county, the city, Ellettsville, and Steinsville, and then we allocate that between police and fire. I will speak to the first part of that, which is PSAP, and yes, there is a surplus in that fund. We have been meeting with the county on that, and they have a surplus in their fund as well. We're currently crafting a recommendation on the upcoming budget for dispatch, and the intent is that we will make a recommendation to spend down those 2 reserves over the next 3 to 5 years, and then we would adjust on an annual basis once we see the actual results for that fiscal year. For the police and fire department, it is anticipated there will be no surplus by the end of this year. We did have some surplus, and we were able to utilize that for funding in the current fiscal year. So I don't anticipate any balance left at the end of this fiscal year for police and fire.
Thank you. May I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
So you said the city and county has been meeting to discuss the 2023 budget and spending down the reserves in the PSAP, public safety answering point part of the budget, the dispatch. I thought the dispatch, like you said, was a budget handled through the city. So I'm a little confused when you say the county and city have been meeting. Is that just because the public safety funding board is comprised of the sheriff and the police? Is that the negotiations you're talking about?
Yeah, so I'll walk through the process real quick, just so that for you and the public as well. Dispatch, while it is a city department, is a joint operation of the city and the county for dispatching across the county. Indiana University has their own center that we utilize as a backup. The typical process is that city and county officials will get together and craft a budget that we then make a recommendation to the dispatch policy board. They will then vote on that, and then it gets forwarded to the subcommittee of the tax council. It gets reviewed by that group, which is comprised of the 4 units of government, and then they make a recommendation back to the city and county for approval of that budget. So you will all see that during our annual budget presentation in August, as well as a formal adoption of that budget, and the county council will review and adopt that budget as well. So it's kind of a unique group, or in that it's housed at the city, so there's all city employees, but the budget gets reviewed, developed, and approved jointly by the city and county to forward to the groups for their approval.
Got it. And so the dispatch or the PSAP budget cannot be spent on fire stations, police stations, things like that, right? It has to be spent on just the dispatch.
Yes, and that budget gets voted on first, and then the funds, any remaining funds from the public safety lit falls down to the 4 units of government based on a modified levy basis.
Right, very familiar with that, as I've been on the committee multiple times, as you know. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Mr. Underwood.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rallo.
Thank you. Mr. Underwood, I inquired last time about the expiring CREED fund and its potential to be used, for instance, for offsetting the cost of the fire or a police station, and perhaps would be advisable because we could then borrow less and have less in the form of bond payment. Do you have more information to share on that?
Yes, we published in our Q&A links to the actual statute that guides that. Obviously, we have 2. We have the downtown CRED and the Thompson CRED, and those are legislated as to the uses We believe that there's a potential for the use of some of those funds if the criteria is met for the location and redevelopment of a site. We certainly, as we have done in the past, we'll analyze funds on hand as well as bonding capacity, revenue streams, and adequate reserves, and maximize the use of those combinations. So we believe that first brush is that it would qualify if it met the criteria for the uses of CRED.
So it would qualify, is it my understanding there's some geographical limitations in terms of where it can be spent?
Yes, and there's some, it can also be said that there may be a little bit of leeway if it's close to the edge of those geographic. So yeah, both of those CREDs have specific geographic areas. The TIFs are a little bit more lenient in that it's defined as inner serving. So, but the CRED's a little bit more strict on that. So you can't go half a mile away and use CRED funds to build something.
Just one quick follow-up. Are the funds transferable? Can they be placed in other funds?
They have to be used directly out of those funds until such time as they expire.
And they're expiring, so we could transfer them. Are they not?
Once there's a process to close those out, but yes, once that's all done.
Okay, so that would free us of geographic limitations, it seems to me, if they could be transferred.
Possibly, yes.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
Corporation Counsel, Kate. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Flaherty.
Few follow-ups on the same thing, the downtown Creed district. Roughly what would be the timeline of when those funds would expire and potentially be available for transfers for other purposes?
I believe the downtown, and Ms. Kate can correct me if I'm wrong, and she's probably looking them up right now. I believe the downtown expired last year, and I believe the Thompson expires June 30th of this year.
That's my understanding.
So the downtown Creed fund is already eligible essentially for being closed down and put in another general fund or other fund for another purpose, is that right?
That is my understanding. Once we go through the closeout process, yes.
Right, thank you. Could you speak a little more to the history of the downtown fund in particular? What was the motivation for why it was created, as well as what are the typical uses for funds in those districts? Or typical purpose?
Well, now you're dating me, so I don't believe I was here for the original creation of those, so I don't know that I can speak directly to that. I know what the purposes are. I can tell you what the last couple of uses have been in both, and that was to allow, the last one in the downtown was an agreement, funding agreement with Envisage that allowed them to expand, and they used that for remodeling and attraction of employees, and there were certain points that they had to hit in order to continue to qualify and not claw back from that, and they hit all those. And then the other, in the Thompson, the last one was Cook Pharmica prior to when they sold to Catalent for the same thing, expansion. And they again had both employment and capital investments that they had to meet in order to not repay that, and they hit those as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions from council? Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Underwood. Given the size of the current proposal, does the city have a current shortfall in the budget? If we're looking to generate 18 million or 21 million, is there a shortfall that we're looking at? Or can you talk a little bit about that and help me understand that?
Yes, I will answer that question. Obviously, a part of the request is to provide additional operational funds for anticipated increases in costs. Part of that is in public safety, obviously, as we've talked about the contract there. But we've anticipated that without new revenues, with increases in costs, with trying to stay competitive with staff, that we will see a budget shortfall of $3 to $5 million per year going forward.
Does that answer your question? You need to
Yes.
follow up?
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate it. I'll have a different question later, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. It's just a follow-up, and maybe I've missed it. But what balances do we have in these CREED funds, approximate?
Approximately 10 million, I believe, in the Thompson and 6 million in the downtown.
Thank you.
Additional questions? And any more first round before we move to a second round?
I believe the mayor may have a comment.
Madam President, may I make a
Yes.
brief comment?
Yes,
Just
absolutely.
in the general vein, thank you. I do want to note, first, I want to thank the council. We've had a lot of good discussions. I think at the intro, I just would have said we appreciate all the good hard work trying to work through all this. I feel like I should make one general comment in connection with the general questions lately. The lit local income tax proposal is really designed to create a stable, ongoing, viable source of revenue for ongoing expenses. And those ongoing expenses, as we know, is a wide range of expenses, including really long-range sustainable plans for public safety facilities, not just even over the next 10 or 20 years, but to create a viability to have a really long-term sustainable construction, maintenance, replacement schedule. I do want to caution that, yes, the city has balances. We have balances in several funds. Those balances are very important to maintain to preserve flexibility for unforeseen activities, actions, unforeseen needs, downturns in the economy. You know, we do that in the general fund reserve. I just would note I know there can be an interest in spending down balances, and it's certainly appropriate to ask about that. But I do want to note these one-time funds are very important as a source of strength and prudence for our community to be able to manage through unforeseen future events. And Controller Underwood and Corporate Counsel Kate and I, and of course our colleagues, are very careful to try to maintain sufficient balances, use them, of course, to invest where needed, but not to spend down kind of one-time money in order to meet ongoing expenses. And I think it's important to note that. We certainly look forward to working together on those, but this city has been very careful, and you on the council have been careful to maintain and preserve the fiscal, conservative, strong approach so that we're able to weather events without layoffs like we've done in the last recession. And Mr. Underwood, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I just, using cash reserves for ongoing expenses and needs is something that we have to be very careful about, because it takes away really important cushion and a prudent reserve for folks.
All right, thank you. Before we move to second round, I have a question. I'm wondering is Chief Dekoff on the call here this evening? I have some general questions about the current status of BPD with respect to staffing levels, and then moving away from that into the social work, the DRO, and the community specialist programs. So if Chief Dekoff is with us, is he?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Again, my question has to do with a general overview, if you could provide one, on the current staffing levels of the BPD, and then with respect to our social worker program, what it's looking like currently, and then I'll have some questions about some of the stuff that's in the public safety bucket with respect to expanding that.
So our staffing is authorized for 105 officers, and we currently are about 20 down. We just recently approved some incentive packages such as signing bonuses, some housing incentives, some recruiting incentives for officers to help recruit candidates to the department, which we're hopeful that will help. Obviously, the money that is put in to the new contract is a significant raise, which will make us much more competitive. And so we're very hopeful that will allow us to bring on more officers, sworn officers, so that we can get our numbers up. But we are down, which does limit some of the things that we can do. Our social workers, we have 3 current social workers. They assist on calls that officers get. Officers can request that they show up on calls. We do not directly dispatch social workers to calls currently. There are some safety concerns about that. We also have community service specialists that respond to minor traffic accidents. They take minor reports that don't require any type of investigation, that are more geared towards people might need a report for insurance purposes. They do those types of things. They do extra patrols. And so we have one of those, or 2 of those right now. I'm sorry, 3. We are down. We have 5 openings that we are in the final process of filling those positions. So hopefully within the next month, we will have those people hired, and they will be able to help assist take calls.
Okay, so with respect to, you're saying the community resource officers, we're 5 down there from what we've currently budgeted in our current plan to reinforce?
Yes, the community service specialists.
Okay. All right, I'll have another question about this later, but thank you. That's a good general overview. Any other questions from council? Councilmember Rallo.
Thank you. Mr. Underwood, let's talk a little bit about the PS Lit. Could you describe what our share of revenue is per year, and then what would be spent in terms of fixed costs as opposed to discretionary? So what do we have left over when we pay the fixed costs, like salaries to dispatch, and any maintenance or that's already penciled in? What do we have in terms of discretionary spending every year to, say, apply to the capital plan and the budget for PS Lit?
If you'll give me a moment, I've got the plan in front of me, but I don't have the, let me make sure that I've got the right dollar amounts. I can tell you this, that I do know that each year, we provide you, and I sent out a copy earlier this afternoon of that 10-year plan, is that we typically don't have enough money to fund all of the requests for police and fire. So they tend to have to cut back some of those things. So, currently when we look at the total amount, and this includes the column that I call the 11th year, there's about $69 million worth of requests on there, and we range anywhere from $2 million to just under $3 million per year in the annual buckets. So we typically don't have any leftover excess revenues for that, and we do adjust the plan accordingly. That's the nice thing about having the dispatch budget in advance of kind of everything else, is that we have a fairly good idea of what we think will be the flow down amounts for that to the various units. And then obviously, as you all know, we get an update August the 1st, which is relatively late, and then we get a final number late in October after the state takes their final swat at it, so to speak. The only good news is on both the lit and the PS lit is once those amounts are certified by the state, we are guaranteed to receive those. So they do keep an escrow account for each county, so that if collections come in below what is authorized, they will take it out of that escrow to make sure that the units can count on. It's the one revenue stream that we're guaranteed to get the amounts that they tell us we're going to get.
Okay, I was hoping for some numbers. So
if you'll give me a minute, I'll jump back on.
Okay.
I'll come back to you with the numbers.
Okay, why don't we postpone that question? Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Rosenberger has a question.
Is Mr. Connell on the call? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, hey. Okay, great. Just wanted to ask, I thought that we got new numbers for the East-West Express Lane, Transit Line, and then the enhanced frequency to make it a maximum of 30 minutes. Is that right, that there are new numbers there?
We reduced the East-West Express to 1.75 with BT contributing to the operating expense as well.
Sorry,
There was no $1,750,000. The BT revenues will offset the reduction to continue to provide that same level of service.
Okay, that's for the East-West Express Line?
Correct.
Okay, and BT can offset that, so you reduce it to 1.75. And then, is that the only change in your line items?
We reduced the microtransit from 1.4 to 1.1, and that may require us to use a hybrid approach where we may do some in-house and use transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft.
Okay, and that's the only other change?
That's the only two that I submitted. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Additional questions from council? Councilmember Smith?
There was a question that perhaps was going to be answerable from Mr. Underwood, following up on Mr. Rallo's question about PS Lit. So shall I hold that for a moment?
Is it regarding the numbers that he's looking for?
No, it's a more general question.
Well, why don't you go ahead and pose it?
Okay. There's been some discussion with the county and other members in the community. Can we use the PS Lit to fulfill the raise in the police services contract?
Controller Jeff Underwood, I'll jump back in. As I've stated, there's not an extra amount necessarily. There has not been. We've dedicated it solely to capital for the most part over the years. To answer Councilmember Rallo's question, last year the amount for public safety, police and fire out of that flowed down was $3.131 million. So it's around that. So there's not been any extra, and between the administration and the council, the agreement was to use that to fund capital replacements Many of you can remember the pictures of a lot of the equipment showed holes in the floorboards that had inoperable equipment, the need to borrow equipment from surrounding fire departments to assist us on certain calls. And we've been able to replace the worst of that equipment and get to the point now where we'll get into normal replacement of those before they get into dire straits. And as the mayor said earlier, we don't want to go backwards with that. So I believe it will continue to be committed mainly to capital needs as we move forward.
Well, since the one of the number one priorities that appear to be quoted by lots of people in the community and different leaders in the community, that public safety is our number one priority, I wondered if we could raise the PS lit so that it is whatever raise that comes out is dedicated solely to public safety, and therefore focus on public safety, and then it makes it a cleaner thought in my mind on how to think about this as far as increasing revenues and increasing taxes on individuals out in the community and the county and Ellettsville and Steinsville.
If I may just make a quick comment about that. First, in the 2016 public safety lit, as Mr. Underwood indicated, I believe while not legally binding to restrict that increase to non-personnel costs, I do believe in the discussions, if we go back and look at the discussions with the public and each other, that we were committed to investing that 0.25 to make sure we kept our public safety departments well supplied and up to date and safe. And I think that's what it has been used for. It is not legally restricted to that, but I do believe that's the reason it was passed for that. As to the question of using a PS lit instead of the economic development lit, the first point is we are committing together the economic development lit in substantial portion to public safety. We're mutually committing to do that at the city level, and I fully expect to do that. The second point I just make is if we were to try to seek that same $4 million or 4.5 or 3.8 million, whatever that amount is for public safety with a PS lit, it would require a higher tax rate to be imposed to return the same money to the city as the ED lit does. And I don't recommend that we haven't had anybody asking for a higher tax rate in order to fund the same services.
Why is it a higher tax rate?
That I'll turn to Mr. Underwood.
Get my mute button off here. It's because there's a difference in the distribution methodology between the different buckets. So we only get about 51% of the public safety dollars that come down to us versus 58 in the ED. So there's a 7% differential. And as I spoke to last time, that's about 0.3% difference in order to raise the same amount of money. So if we wanted to raise the same amount of money as originally, I just used that as a baseline, instead of 855, it would have to be 885 between a combination of the two rates to raise the same kind of money.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Mr. Underwood and Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional council questions? Councilmember Rallo.
Well, Mr. Underwood, could we discuss a little bit more? Have you had an opportunity to look at those numbers? You mentioned one of them. So what's the total revenue again of the PS Lit Fund for the city share?
For non-dispatch share has been, last year was 3.131 million. It's been around $3 million.
About 3.1 million?
Give or take.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
3.13.
okay, so that could be called discretionary, that we would apply to things like the capital expenses that are listed in the 10-year capital expense plan for police and fire?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
In that sense, yes, it flows down, and the administration makes proposals on how to use that funds, and the council is presented in the annual appropriation budget.
Okay. Do we agree that the current cash balance of the fund is about $4 million?
I would double check on that. I know that we do at the beginning of the year. That's here. The balance at the end of 2021 for the PS Lit account, which includes police, fire, and public safety, was $5.448 million.
5.4. I miscounted. So, so I'm
now,
trying.
What that number does not include would be any encumbrances
Okay.
Against that fund, and then it gets split between the two groups, dispatch and police and fire. And as I said, I don't anticipate that we'll have a unencumbered balance in the police and fire with the current budget, and that and in addition, one of the recommendations that we've worked on between the city and county is that we would maintain a 4-month reserve in that PS Lit account for dispatch operations, so that we would have a balance to operate against should there be any delays in distributing the PS Lit. So essentially the city would not have to backstop that. So the idea is that we would, much like our 2 other operating funds, is we try to operate with a 4-month balance.
Okay, so I'm maybe counting about, just back of the napkin, about $800,000 to be in reserve for dispatch out of the 4.5 million.
Seems a little low under.
Okay, well, let's round it up to $1 million.
Yeah.
And just I guess my question is, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around this, what we have in terms of yearly revenue, what we are committed to, what's the discretionary spending that could be applied to various anticipated capital expenditures that we have a list going out 10 years. I count, if the cash balance is $4 or $5 million, the outlays for the next 5 years look to be $7 million for the, approximately $7 million for fire and $5 million for police. So that's a total of 12. And if we have a discretionary share that's increasing about $3 million per year, that in 5 years is $15 million. $15 million plus 4 or 5 is about $20 million. We're committed to 12. It does seem to me that there seems to be some room within the PS Lit budget for items in this public safety bucket of the lit that we're considering to be transferred to public safety. That's how I'm reading it. But I'll leave that as, you know, if you don't have a response right now, it's sort of a comment, but that's what I'm looking at. I'm seeing that we do have some room there. And if you disagree, I'd like to hear that in terms of numerically. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Shall we leave that there? Additional questions from council? Councilmember Volan.
I'd like to actually pick up where Councilmember Barallo left off. If I understand correctly, of the $5.4 odd million that is being generated by the PS Lit, about $2 million that's going to dispatch, and the rest is police and fire. And my understanding has been, at least for the Bloomington Police and Bloomington Fire Departments, that they have used that money towards capital replacement, specifically of vehicles. Is that a correct way to characterize the use of PS Lit dollars in the past several years? I'm not sure who needs to answer that. Would that be Mr. Underwood?
Yes, what we have done as the money flows down after PS Lit, then we have utilized that to replace equipment for the, yes, because
Right.
we were way behind on replacements. So.
Right, and I understand that that replacement cost has been considerable. Has it all gone to capital replacement, or has there been any other use of those dollars besides equipment replacement?
Maybe for maintenance contracts or repair costs as well. It's not. None of it has gone to personnel costs.
Mr. Mayor, do you feel like the departments have caught up in their capital? Are they on a capital replacement schedule that's adequate, or should we effectively think of the dollars in PS Lit as always necessary for capital equipment replacement?
Thank you for the question. I think the short answer is yes. I think the expected use of PS Lit going forward is prudent and appropriate to dedicate to the police and fire, public safety equipment, replacement, maintenance, upgrades. I mean, it's included things like as many vehicles, but also training facilities, et cetera. I do want to make a general comment, which is I think the appropriate spirit of the council has been we need to invest in public safety. There's been a substantial, that was a very strong message last year in the budget hearings. It's been a very strong message consistently that several of you have urged, and I agree with, that we need to invest in public safety. I do not think there's nothing wrong with asking about balances, but I do not think we can rob Peter to pay Paul. We do not have extra public safety money lying around, and I think the needs for public safety are going to continue to rise. So anyway.
And I appreciate that. I'm not suggesting that we should rob Peter to pay Paul, but it had been my understanding, and I'd love to hear from Chief Moore, who I saw pop on here, but it had been my understanding that there might have been some slack, let's put it that way, in the PS Lit fund. So, but with that, I think maybe it would be good to hear from Chief Moore and towards the non-equipment capital costs that the fire department is facing.
Jason Moore, Fire Chief. Thank you for the question. And I want to make sure that when we talk about this, that we remember where we were and where we're heading. Mr. Underwood talked about the poor equipment, the trucks with the holes in them. We had, firefighters buying their own gear. A lot of things were going wrong in the city just 6 years ago. When we use PS Lit funds, it is primarily for capital expenditures, fire gear, large equipment, small equipment. We have dedicated some towards facility improvements over the past couple of years, just trying to Band-Aid them and keep them going until we could get this bigger plan together. But if we do spend down reserves for these one-time projects, that's going to go against what we're trying to do. Much like the vehicle replacement plan, what we are proposing is a much larger 50 to 100-year plan where, we don't, not only do we fix the issues we're having now, but, we're not going to come back here in 50 years and say, remember when you helped us out and we replaced all these things, we now need to do it again. And there may or may not be one of these account balances to spend down. So this is about not only fixing the problems that we inherited, but it's preventing these problems from ever coming back again by properly planning and budgeting, and then having that reserve fund, as we do for all other things, when things go wrong, or like this past year with COVID, we saw a miraculous increase in fire equipment price of 10 to 14%. So that goes way beyond what our 10-year capital plan planned for. We budgeted in for a 2.5% to 3% increase in equipment per year. And when we call someone and we start pricing out new fire equipment, and they say it's now 11% higher. That's where some of these other reserve funds may be able to help us meet that need without completely scrapping the project or completely diminishing the project to where it doesn't meet the need.
Appreciate that. I've got more questions, but I can defer to somebody else.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
In the same vein, I wanted to go back to what Councilmember Volan summarized and see if this understanding is correct. So Mr. Underwood was talking about a surplus of $5.4 million in PS Lit funds, and Mr. Volan said about $2 million of that is from dispatch and the rest is from the police and fire chunk. Is that correct?
I would say the cash balance at the end of the year, I wouldn't say necessarily reserves because there are encumbrances included in that amount. The reserve, I believe, would be about $1 million, and I believe that the surplus for dispatch lit would be about $1.2 million of that total. The remainder of that cash would be for police and fire, but as I said, our forecast is that at the end of this year, that monies have been either encumbered or are part of the current year budget and would be spent.
Okay, sorry, it went a little fast for me. So if we think about reserves, so end of year and unencumbered, what are we looking at in the PSAP, the dispatch, and what are we looking at in police and fire?
I anticipate that cash balance after encumbrances will be about $2.2 million, and that will all be for dispatch.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
All right. Any additional questions? If I could get Chief Dekoff to come back briefly. I do have another question of just about our current capacity.
Okay.
Who's feeding back? Is that me making the noise? Sorry about that. My question has to do with our current capacity with our social worker program. As you know, we're all very enthusiastic about that. Having participated in that very first social worker in the policing conference last year, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for having social workers, resource officers, and of course before that, we had our DRO program. But my question to you has to do with the current capacity, because it looks like in this public safety bucket, we do have some opportunity for expanding these programs, and I just kind of want to know what your take is on the workload that our current personnel, and I was a little taken aback by the fact that we're not even fully staffed at this point, at least with our community resource specialists. So is it fair to say that right now are the needs for an expansion of the social work community resource program, or is the more critical need getting our patrol officers, our staffing levels, and again, you've mentioned we should be at 105 and we're down 20. Just what's your take on what the most critical needs are, and could there be some deferment of some of these things that are in the public safety bucket right now?
Well, obviously, the most critical need is the sworn officers because they work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our social workers work Monday through Friday, usually from about 8 in the morning to 6 at night. You know, the social workers, it's a very popular and important program. And there are probably areas that we could increase the services that they provide. That we currently aren't doing, but that's something that we would need to look at to figure out how we can do that. But the most critical need right now is replacing those 20 officers that are down, because that leaves our shifts short every day. That you know, they're not working to full complement of the staffing levels on each shift. So that's the most critical need. The community service specialists. We had, that is a very important program as well. They do relieve a lot of the minor calls that the sworn officers take. And it frees them up to do more, you know, to respond to more serious calls and things like that. And that is a program that if we get additional community service specialists, that we will expand the number of hours, because they currently, they stop working at about 8 p.m. each night. And we could expand that later into the night to benefit third shift for a little bit as well too, because there are minor calls that all the shifts respond to, and that program was designed to do just that, to respond to minor type calls that tied up a sworn officer that that might not necessarily need a sworn officer response.
Okay, do we have downtown resource officers anymore, or has that program virtually been phased out with the new personnel?
It has not been phased out, but we have, when we started that program, we had 6 officers. We currently have 2 because our staffing levels are so low that we've not been able to replace those officers.
Okay, thank you. And I see Mayor Hamilton, did you have another comment about this question?
Yes, thank you very much. I guess just the simple point I'd make is it's not either or, it's both and. We absolutely, with the council, are committed to doing all we can to invest in, expand, rebuild, if you will, the full staffing in the sworn officers. And we are committed to helping achieve better public safety in our community with additional resources such as the community service specialists, the social workers, some of the fire department facilities as well. I will just note, whenever I'm with communities from around the country in different cities, this is a very common effort, particularly among progressive communities, to identify ways to enhance and strengthen the capacity of sworn officers to do their job, those fundamental jobs that they need to do, that we need them to do, and also facilitating stronger public safety with some of these collaborative accompanying services. So it's a both and absolutely, with all of us committed to public safety, as I know we are, this budget tries to fund and identifies how to fund both and not pick one over the other.
Yeah, I'm certainly not questioning the efficacy and the value to it. Again, there was a lot of enthusiasm for it during the conference. I'm just concerned about our current capacity to fully utilize this new, the new staffing that we already have now before we start to increase that. I'm just looking at ways that we can take a look at decreasing this ask for the ED lit to see if there are either other ways to fund it, or if these are things that can wait until our current staffing levels are a little bit more balanced and equal. So no question here that this is a valuable program for this community or any community. So thank you very much for that. Councilmember Volin, did you have another question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with a slightly different line of questioning. It's a subject I've been loath to bring up, but I want to talk about the 2 CREED districts that we have in the city. And I know that this has sort of come up already tonight, and that the mayor is proposing some money from the CREED to help finance public safety. But first, I'd like to get a basic question answered. My understanding is that the downtown CREED, which has a balance of about $10 million in it, is set to expire in June. Can somebody from the administration verify this?
I know Mr. Underwood reported that earlier. Let me just make one point clearly. I think it would be better for our community's future not to invest the CREED money in public safety. I believe it would be better to fund, as proposed, more robust future investments with reliable ongoing revenue. We are trying to work with council to identify savings. So I don't want it to be,
I appreciate
we're
that.
responding to needs to try to reduce the cost. I think we have capacity to do what we propose, but we're trying to work with you to cut those costs.
Well, no, I appreciate that. I mean, like I had thought perhaps this might be a source of, for the entirety might be used for public safety capital, and I agree that it's an economic development tool, but can we at least get some confirmation that, I mean, is it the administration's intention to maintain that money for investment in the district where it was derived?
I don't know that I'm ready to answer that general question right now. I think I would return to my general point, which is I don't think it's prudent to try to strip out every dollar of every reserve that we have. I know that's not what you're proposing, but to fund what are ongoing expenses. We are working with you to try to identify ways to reach a compromise among the 9 of you. But I do think it's important to protect the flexibility of this mayor or the next mayor or this council and this community to respond to needs. And I have not taken a position. I don't know whether they should be dedicated solely to the geographic area that they were generated in. It's a good question. I don't know.
On the contrary, what I'm concerned with is that the creed will expire and the money will flow into the general fund. And so if your statement is a commitment that you're not going to allow that money to leave the creed fund and that it will be used for its intended purpose, I might be more okay with the $3 million with $3 million of it going to public safety, especially if it's located in the Creed district, which would actually exclude this building, but would include much of the extended Courthouse Square Historic District.
Well, I'm not at position to commit to that reservation. As I understand it, what you're saying is you're asking if some of it is dedicated and removed from its kind of original purpose to be used for public safety, is the rest of it going to be protected for its original use, if that's how I hear your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't, again, I don't know. I don't think we've thought through that. I do think the creed generally is an important tool that's been really powerful, and I don't want to give it up. I particularly don't think we should give it up to just fill a gap that's going to have to be filled anyway with operating expenses. But we're trying to help the council reach a conclusion that everybody can get behind. So we're trying to stay flexible and discuss that.
That's the answer I wanted to hear. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Councilmember Rallo.
Thank you. Let me pose this to Mr. Underwood. So I'm wary of, in terms of police budget for future raises, I wouldn't want us to find ourselves where we were prior to this FOP contract again. That is, and that contract does begin to make us competitive, but I don't think it fully does make us competitive in terms of wages. Where do we find future raises for police and fire personnel? Have those been built into this budget in terms of we're anticipating capital expenditures forward that we need? What about future raises for police and fire?
Well, I'll talk in general about raises for all city employees as well, because we want to be competitive across the city, because as I said, everyone is important to the overall operation of the city. And I see the mayor's on, I'm going to jump off, but we have included in this request general operating monies that would be utilized as a part of raises for our employees. And we want to stay competitive, and we try to look at that each year. We look at inflation, we look at other, who do we compete with for employees, and how do we stay competitive? We did a salary study a number of years ago, and which you all assist us with, and we spread those raises out over a 3-year period, and generally, and completed the project over 5. And so we will continue to try to be as competitive with salaries as we can. I'll let the mayor take over from here.
Thanks for the question. I think our original proposal, of course, funded the $1.5 million. We do expect the lit, assuming the economy continues to proceed as our economy has for many, many years, that lit revenue will gradually increase to allow modest rise. I do think the more the proposal with annual income is reduced, the less room we have as a city as a whole to respond to future pressures. I do think we have adequate funding to put our police salaries where you asked us to do, and which does make us competitive. if that marketplace changes dramatically in the future, there may be decisions that have to be made. The more flexibility we have, the better. The less flexibility, the more difficult those kind of balances will be. But I do think we're prudent with this proposal to be in a position to fund well and to keep up with inflation and to keep up with overall needs. But the more we restrict it or strip out balances or other things that are necessary for that kind of cushion, the more difficult it may be in the future to accommodate unforeseen needs like that.
So just for clarification, I'm hearing maybe two different things. I'm hearing from Mr. Underwood that it's going to come from the portion dedicated to essential city services for, anticipated raises for staff, or is it coming from PS Lit, future raises for police and fire?
I'll jump back in.
Go ahead.
No. As the mayor noted in this request, there is, under the public safety bucket, there's $1.5 million request that would fund the proposed contract for those raises to the police department over the next 4 years. Then there is another $3 million in general operating ask that would be utilized for the other employees and increasing costs. So it's a combination of the money in the public safety bucket of $1.5 million and the $3 million ask, so a total of $4.5 million for operational costs.
Okay, I'm still maybe a little dense here because I guess what I'm anticipating is that the dedicated amount in the public safety bucket is to honor the current contract, but it's not for future raises. But we are looking to make sure that all city employees and police, fire, and everyone else in the city employed, that we have sufficient raises to keep up with, inflation, which is now, getting close to double digits. So I'm hearing that it is out of the general operating bucket that you're going to find increases in all salaries throughout the city. Is that correct, Mr. Underwood?
Let me try and break it down a little bit more granular. The proposed police contract has increases in salary built into it for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
We anticipate, and the average of that over that 4 years is $1.5 million. So that ask should cover the current contract.
Okay.
The remaining $3 million would be for the rest of the city.
Yeah, I'm looking out further. For instance, you're looking out further in terms of capital. And anyway, I'll leave it at that. I have another question later.
All right. Additional questions? Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thanks. This is for the mayor. It's pretty in general, but Mayor, just looking at some proposals, for cuts in this tax. Well, first I want to say, the more we discuss this and the more questions that are answered, the more I'm on board with the original proposal. I think everything seems really justified, and cutting little bits of each doesn't make sense to me. But I want to ask if cuts are being made, what makes more sense to the administration? Is it, a line item? Is it a percentage across the board? Because, the way it seems to me, like the East-West Express transit line, it's $1.75 million to get that to go. If we fund, 1.6, do we have an express transit line? I don't know, right? And if we don't fund a 30-minute maximum frequency, we don't have a 30-minute maximum frequency. So I guess just, I know this is a deliberation between all of us, but what makes the most sense to the administration?
Thanks for the question. Look, this is a very complicated mix of things. I agree with your point, Councilmember Rosenbarger, that sometimes we can nip and slice and try to trim a little bit, and can sometimes cut into bone or muscle instead of fat, right? We can have implications in the program that none of us would want to see. I do feel we have been trying to work very hard to identify reductions, and you heard from Mr. Connell that the transit feels they can responsibly support with some of their funds that gap. We asked them, can you give us some room? There's cost to that. There's opportunity cost to that, but we think it's responsible to do it. I do think from our perspective, the difference between kind of where several of you are now and where I think the range, I think people have worked really hard to get pretty close to each other. I believe my view is that passing something close to that's quite important, because if we don't do it, we're in a very bad position. We will work to do everything possible to make sure we can accomplish things now. But I would say, look, if $2 million of housing becomes $1 million of housing, there's dramatic difference in what we can do in housing. But that's, judgments that y'all are going to have to make and share. I do think the latest discussions, and I know as folks are looking at some of these details, the latest discussions do put us in a position where we can do a lot of good. It's, as I said from the beginning, it's not perfect from my perspective, but I think we're close. I do think some of the discussions about continuing to spend down balances, further refinements do risk us moving into territory where we won't be able to deliver what I think our folks need. But I think we're very close. I encourage y'all to keep talking about it, and I appreciate the collaborative nature and the compromises that already have been taking place. I think they're helping us move it forward.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answers, but thank you.
If there are no further questions, we've been at this for a little over an hour now. I would like to turn to the public comment. We can certainly return back after public comment to any further questions you may have or any final comments. So reminding the public who are tuning in from Zoom, if you wish to make a public comment, to please raise your hand and indicate that. I'd like to get some idea how many people are out there who are interested in making a comment. I think we probably have been keeping the comment level at 3 minutes per commenter. We will stick with that this evening, and we will alternate back and forth between any comment that is here in chambers this evening and who is with us via Zoom. So do we have an indication of how many people are with us this evening?
Watching via Zoom who may wish to comment, please use the raise hand feature, which you can find under your reactions tab in your control bar. Some folks may need to find that under their more tab. If you have dialed into the meeting on a phone line, you can dial *9. And if all of that fails, please send a message via chat to the meeting host that you would like to comment, and we can recognize you that way. While I was talking, I saw one hand go up. At the moment, that's all I see.
Okay, well, we do have someone behind the podium right now. So is there a place to sign in up there? We'd like you to sign in. If not, again, please state your name, and once you are signed in and ready to go, you will have 3 minutes.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, Madam President. Some good discourse tonight. This is Christopher MG representing the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. You've heard from me in the last few weeks regarding our survey results, which represented an overwhelming majority of respondents skeptical of this current LIP proposal. Next, we outlined our priorities. First, we pushed for the fully funded public safety bucket. We've seen firsthand this last weekend the need for a robust, well-trained, and appreciated police force. Our second priority is the public transit. This entailed the support of the 30-minute frequency on the BT weekday schedule brought up as well. More importantly, we emphatically stated to amend Chapter 2.76 of the Bloomington Municipal Code, enabling BT to provide service outside those city limits. This would be essential to that east-west express line that's very coveted by most of the community. The Chamber appreciates the quality of place in our community. This does not come for free. Our government is continuing to ask to tackle various problem areas. However, tonight I do want to testify our desire to scale this proposal back to a palatable level. This historic 64% increase in lit remains excessive and a bit rushed. While it's never an ideal time to raise taxes, economists at Moody Analytics estimate that household incomes are spending about $300 a month due to historical inflation. Furthering my point, tomorrow, the county assessor's office will be mailing out that Form 11. This is their annual notice informing property owners of last year's calculated value. What taxpayers will discover is an unprecedented 16% average increase in their property assessment. Then we see MCCSC putting together a referendum for on the November 8th ballot. This is additional property tax mainly to cover teacher and support staff salaries. The confluence of all these tax matters across multiple jurisdictions point to a necessity of our local elected leaders to coordinate together on the most pressing needs of our community while avoiding excessive tax burden. Finally, some talk and details about the process of the lit has been discussed tonight. It's important that the City Council not make its goal to reach that number 8 in the yes column. The Chamber believes that providing the County Council the opportunity and duty to weigh in on this tax increase that affects all residents in Monroe County is imperative. This is necessary for not only sound democracy, but the hope of the Chamber to see stronger relations between the county and the city moving forward. It's no secret of the county's need to rebuild the new criminal justice center and program that it entails. This will require them to seek out additional revenues sooner than later. Part of being an elected official requires these tough votes as projects only become more expensive as time passes. I thank the council for their time tonight. I appreciate all the difficult work and good questionings we've heard tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. And if we could go to the Zoom, we can ask the first person with the hand up if they would like to identify themselves, and they will have 3 minutes.
Yes, our first and at the moment only commenter on Zoom is Sherry's phone, who should now be able to unmute and state their full name.
Hi, my name is Sherry Hillenberg, and I'm actually a resident of the county. I watched your meeting last week, and I watched as many of you showed a tremendous amount of empathy for the graduate students at IU. And I watched as the grad students, some of them stood there and talked about how they had difficulties making ends meet. They had difficulties feeding their families. They had a child who had rode around in a car with no heater because they couldn't afford to fix it. And I certainly support better wages, better treatment for those graduate students. But I guess the question I have for the council is, how can you sit here tonight and impose another tax on them? How can you say you're so concerned about housing and the cost of living and inflation, yet in turn, you want to impose another tax, and not just a higher tax, but an extremely higher tax? I heard the mayor say last week with the bond issues that they would be paid for with an increase in property taxes. Again, we're saying to those people, and it's not just graduate students, there are many people out there that can't make ends meet. We're saying to them, oh, you know, we feel really badly because you can't afford to live in the city of Bloomington, but we're going to go ahead and increase your taxes. I just really think that it should involve more than the city of Bloomington. We do not live in Bloomington County. We live in Monroe County. And that involves citizens from Monroe County and Ellettsville and Steinsville. And I realize that at this point in time, the legislature allows this to pass if 8 of you vote in favor of it. So we have to work at the state level to get that changed. So if this does pass, it can never happen again. But I would just say to you, I think we're doing an about face. We're saying, yes, we care about you people, but oh, by the way, we're going to take some more of your money. We're glad you're getting a higher wage now, but we're going to take more of your pay. I just think now is not the time. It's just not the time. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And next at the podium, if you will sign in, please.
Hi. Excuse me. Peter Dorfman. Before we start the clock, could I ask, is this the only opportunity this evening for public comment?
Yes.
It is. Okay. Quick general comment. Just a reminder, I know that the only option we have in Indiana is a flat tax, which is inherently regressive. So I think as you reflect on this figure, that the mayor is asking for reflect carefully on the impact on people at the low end of the income scale, because it will hurt. To be more specific, I raised an issue this afternoon, or this morning actually, concerning a specific line item in the mayor's proposal. It's under quality of living, and it is about a proposal to use some of this tax money to fund what is referred to as missing housing types, supporting missing housing types. So this is the second time I've been raising this in person at one of these meetings. I interpret that to mean that the mayor wants to spend some tax money to subsidize the development of plexes in what have been formerly single-family neighborhoods. I think, given the strength of the resistance to that idea during the debates that we had in 2019 and 2021, it would be wrong to ask people not only to accept increased density in core neighborhoods, but to actually use their tax dollars to pay for it. I don't even actually think it's legal. I don't think that when that issue was debated, that anyone anticipated that tax money would be spent to reinforce this proposal, much less overcome a resistance that apparently developers are feeling toward doing it. I think that would require an additional amendment to the UDO, recognizing that tax money is flowing to that subsidy. So I would urge you, before this measure goes any further in your debate, to find that language and strip it out of the proposal, because it's unacceptable, and it will only serve to inflame the debate that we had in 2019 and 2021 over upzoning this city all over again, and I don't think anybody needs that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorfman. Anyone else from the public that is zooming in?
I don't see any additional comments via Zoom at the moment.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, there's someone here from Chambers. Go ahead, please sign in and state your name. You will have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Barbara Moss, and listening here tonight, I'm feeling or picking up a dichotomy between sort of the philosophy that the mayor is espousing about not trying to take monies that might be available, which some of the council members here, such as, well, many of you have asked about. Most of you actually have. And I think, and the mayor, what I'm picking up from the mayor is that we don't want to jeopardize capital improvements or future projects that could come from the proposed income that could come if you pass this proposal. But I would have to say that it is a difficult time, as many people have said tonight. And it is a time where we kind of don't have the what we had in the past, you know, about perhaps taking more liberties with our money, because we are in a position now where we have a lot of inflation and people are having a difficult time. And whereas maybe even 2 or 3 years ago, we could have done a lot more, we would have felt that we had the opportunity to do that because we didn't have the crush that we have now. And so I would ask that you look carefully at the budget, and although I understand, of course, if we had unlimited funds, it would be wonderful to do whatever we wanted to do, to do more, even more bike paths or more parks or whatever it might be. But right now, maybe we just have to look in more narrow view, more prudently, at funding the police and doing the security measures that are really necessary for our city, and holding in abeyance a little bit at this point some of the funds that could come out of this increased tax rate to do other projects that maybe need to be put on hold. You know, it's just not the time for this. And I do personally know lots of people women particularly about my age in town who don't have the funds and who are really quite upset about the prospect of having another tax increase. And even, looking at what's happening with our assessments, even people who are so-called middle class or even a little bit, upper middle class. It's a tough time. So I just ask you to really, really look at this and consider if there are other options aside from raising more taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moss. Now, do we have anyone else on Zoom?
We do, yes. Next on Zoom is Wendy Bernstein.
This is actually Ed Bernstein, since we're sharing confused. I just like to echo what some of the other, the public have said. I'm not a wonk, I'm an artist, but I'm all for taxes. I think in this country that we're basically undertaxed. And I would like to see the police, the safety, and the fire funded as well as we can. What I just, maybe it's almost a question, what I don't understand is why we have to have all these little pieces, particularly the thing that Dorfman mentioned. Cannot the tax be just earmarked towards the things that are the most crucial for the safety and well-being of the whole community, which to me is fully funding our police, fire, and having people and people in the social aspect to help them do their job. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Mr.
I'm
Bernstein.
against the tax as it stands.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public?
Yes, next on Zoom we have Russ Skiba.
Is he able to unmute?
Should be, yes.
Hello, I'm sorry. I couldn't find the unmute button.
We can hear you. You will have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I would echo this is Russ Skiba in Hoosier Acres. I was surprised, like Mr. Dorfman, to see the item in the proposal to, quote, support missing housing types. I think his concerns that this reflects an urge to build more duplexes that are often called the missing middle, and to subsidize the building of those is well placed. It strikes me that when the Plan Commission and the City Council granted developers the right to build duplexes in all the neighborhoods last year, that was in no way authorizing the city to provide financial support for that development. Nor, it seems to me, is that the purpose of city government to spend tax dollars that favors any one type of development over another, especially when the community is so clearly divided on the issue. In addition, I'm disturbed by the size and breadth of this proposal. We do need money to support basic services and police and fire services. We need that money urgently. But many of the other line items appeared to be insufficiently studied or considered. They may or may not be worthwhile investments. But with the striking lack of consensus in our community on so many issues these days in Bloomington, it seems unwise to simply open the community purse for a variety of new initiatives without an opportunity for adequate consideration of the value of those proposals. And that is especially emphasized by some of the economic concerns that you're hearing. We should be very careful during this time about new taxes and only support those new taxes that are absolutely essential, especially when, as it appears in discussions tonight, it's really unclear whether we have the funds currently in the city budget to make the necessary upgrades that we need for the police and fire department. Given that situation, I don't think it would be responsible to move forward with a new tax when, in fact, we haven't even explored whether there are available funds. So I would urge the City Council to vote no on this tax proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Yes, I see Wendy Bernstein's hand has gone back up. I neglected to ask members of the public who may be using the same device as someone else to let us know. I'll check back with
What
Yes.
happened to the sound? Did we lose it?
Go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
To whom are we speaking?
Wendy.
Me? Wendy?
Yeah, I apologize. Is this Wendy Bernstein?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
you should be able to go ahead now.
I tried to jump in right after Ed, but I agree with the speakers who have been active with us on the discussion of the upzoning of the single-family neighborhoods, and hearing us offer the opportunity to pay a tax to further change our neighborhoods against our will was pretty shocking. So my suggestion would be to eliminate the housing, the missing middle housing funding by taxpayers, eliminate that from this budget, this tax for the budget, just wipe out the wording on the housing and let us fund the police and the fire and other issues of community security and safety.
Thank you. Additional comments?
Yes, next on Zoom is Steve, who should now be able to unmute and state his full name.
Are you there? Are they having difficulties with their technology?
It would appear so.
Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. For trouble with my screen. But this is Steve Lehman, and I just wanted to say that I think that a tax increase right now with the inflation and so many questions about what's going to happen in the next few months and the next few years, I think it's a poor idea. And going back to the police and fire, my dad was a career firefighter. I'm totally dedicated to the folks that serve and protect our community here. But we need to get them caught up on their pay. We need to stop the turnover. But at the same time, doing this through a tax proposal that, I mean, our budget has not been thoroughly looked at and decided upon about what we can afford, what we need, and things like that. So I just think it's a great idea just to push this thing back and restudy it and figure out the best thing to do for Bloomington. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. There, anyone else?
I don't see any additional hands raised at the moment. I did have one comment submitted via chat, which I'm happy to read if the chair would like.
Sure.
I should be able to get this in 3 minutes. This is from Renee, who says, "This lit will hurt the most marginalized among us. Throwing $1 million at us while also causing us to need to use it is putting the cart before the horse. I don't want people who are already hurting or barely keeping their heads above water to have to go, as someone said to the township trustee. You cause a problem and then say, here's $1 million to help. The hoops that must be jumped through to get help is difficult enough as it is. Think about the people who also are right on the edge that will now be thrown into poverty. To be clear, I am opposed to the lit increase as written. I also think the county should be able to weigh in." That's the end of the comment. And as I was speaking, I see one more commenter on Zoom with the screen name C. Trzynka. Apologies if I've mispronounced that. Should be able to unmute.
You got it right. Thank you for giving me a moment or two. I am opposed to a tax increase, and I'm especially opposed to a tax increase that is trying to build missing housing in dense areas. I certainly agree with the comments that were made there. But I think also we ought to think more about how we want to respond to a situation, economic situation, where people are under pressure right now. We don't know where inflation is going to go. I mean, inflation is 8.5% in the last month. It may very well get to 9.5. Mortgage interest rates are over 5%. Imagine a young family trying to come up with the down payment and mortgage, and now you're telling them to come up with taxes. I think we need to. You can raise taxes for, especially for purposes like civil services and police and fire, when inflation is predictable. But when inflation is not predictable, and we actually don't know where inflation is going to go, and I'm an economist, I don't know where it's going to go, that this is not the time to do it. So I would end up killing the whole project and not raise taxes at all. Now, of course, somebody usually always says that, but especially in a time when inflation is not just high, but you just don't know where it's going to go. There are I know many younger families who are struggling to come up with a down payment and coming up with a mortgage payment, and this is and this will not help them. So thank you for your time, and I want to register that I'm opposed to it.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else, either from chambers here or at home? All right, well, seeing no further public comment, we will come back to the count. Oh.
Have a late Zoom taker, Rita Barrow, would like to comment.
If you are unmuted, you will have 3 minutes.
It appears as though Ms. Barrow is unmuted. I'm not sure if her audio is connected on her end.
Give her a minute or two, and then is there anyone else that's raised a hand in the meantime?
I don't see any additional commenters at this time. Ms. Barrow, I'm not sure if you're able to try reconnecting your audio. It looks as though you're unmuted on our end.
I will just remind everyone who is listening that there are other means to communicate with the council, and that is certainly through emails. We've gotten quite a few in the past weeks. That is a way to communicate with us at council@bloomington.in.gov if you are unable to make a public comment this evening. No luck with Ms. Barrow?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, we are sorry. If there are no other raised hands, let us come back to the council. Again, we will give another opportunity if any questions need to be raised or any final comments would like to be made. Councilmember Rallo. We can certainly ask more questions, yes.
Yeah, I have a couple. Sorry. Well, I have a couple simple ones, I think, straightforward. Mr. Underwood, regarding the PS Lit, is the balances there, are the revenues transferable to other funds? Any surpluses? You're muted.
Sorry, I turned it off twice here. No, the public safety has to be used specifically for public safety.
Okay.
And primarily for dispatch first.
And another quick one, has it been used for any land purchases?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I have more, but I can wait.
Councilmember Volan.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to ask about this concern over missing middle housing. My understanding is that we're essentially doing a kind of a budget week here, and that this is a resolution. Are we somehow, I mean, I feel very strongly that the basic buckets into which we're exploring the use of this tax money should stay consistent from year to year. However, I recognize that the council doesn't really have the ability to lock in or encumber the money short of contracts. So can the administration talk about this concern that has cropped up over missing middle housing? Mr. Mayor?
Sure, thanks for the question, and Mr. Zodi, I think, is available too if you want more detail. But let me just, this is not any stratagem to support a Plex program in core neighborhoods. The housing program that is outlined, which is desperately needed, is to really support three different buckets within the housing. One is those who are virtually homeless, experiencing deep poverty. I want to remind you that in our biannual city survey, 90% of that scientific survey's respondents either strongly or moderately want the city to invest in supportive housing for people who are experiencing homelessness. So one bucket is about those who are at the most needy end. There's also a bucket for workforce housing, particularly rental, and then a bucket for home ownership, to increase home ownership. Talking the reference in, I guess there are 4 words in there that say support missing middle housing types, could be used, for example, in Hopewell, in the new development, to help try to create some co-housing or some new kinds of housing. It could be used in new areas where we see it. It is not an attempt to shoehorn plexes in the zoning pattern. So let me just be clear about that. If you want more detail, we certainly look forward to working with that in the budget detail. This is an overarching proposal for revenue earmarking for certain purposes, and one of the important purposes is affordable housing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I hear from Mr. Zodi, too? I'd like to hear more specifically what Housing and Neighborhood Development has in mind with these monies.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Councilmember Lowell. John Zodi, Director of the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department. You know, as I've told a number of council members, and Mayor, chime in here if you have anything you want to interject, but pardon me. When you look at those 3 buckets, this is something we've talked about with obviously our 2021 budget proposal, the American Rescue Plan Act, and how we fulfill the need in those 3 buckets. So the Housing Security Group.
Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Is it the 2021 budget proposal?
Sorry, 2022.
Okay, you mean for last year's budget?
Yeah,
that
I was
currently,
just,
okay,
right, I was kind of giving you the chronology since I've been on board, those conversations we'd had about housing, council member. So.
I've lost track of time too.
Yeah,
Please continue.
It was 2021 when I talked to you about 2022. Pardon me. So when we look at how we fill those buckets, Housing Security Group, as the mayor mentioned, is the effort that the United Way and the Community Foundation have undertaken with funding from the city and from the county to tackle how to make homelessness rare, non-repeating, and brief. That's bucket number 1. Bucket number 2 is the rental housing. And this is, let me say about home ownership and rental that there's so many opportunities, right? There's a wealth of ideas and opportunities, and making sure that we are driving the bus forward, so to speak, on how to get more units in Bloomington with costs on the rise with the median sales price. You know, I saw a market report just from last month being well over $270,000 for a median sales price of a home. How do we drive the bus forward on getting more people in a home? Or I will also say, how do we keep people in their homes who want to stay there and who do own? And I think that's really important for neighborhoods. We have a neighborhood services program in hand that works very hard to enhance the quality of our neighborhoods in partnership with the neighborhoods, many of them core neighborhoods, enhancing programs like that. Doing what we can. We get a lot of money from the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department to undertake owner-occupied rehabilitation, emergency home repair. We have several of those online and many more coming down the pike to enhance our ability, our capacity to tackle those problems. Many of those folks are older homeowners. How do we keep people in those homes so that when they're ready to move on, that home can be considered good quality housing stock, safe housing stock, and affordable housing stock when it turns over. And that's something we can really increase our capacity on. That is one of the ideas where this new revenue could help the hand department very specifically, council member, with how to manage those federal funds. It's not just the money to do the work, it's the capacity. Do we have enough staff? Do we have people who could do that? And so those are things that are on the table for ideas: enhancing neighborhood quality, enhancing home ownership, enhancing affordable home ownership on the ownership piece. I can talk about rental, but I feel like you have a question.
Before you do that, and I want you to talk about it, but a phrase you just said caught my ear, which is you talked about federal funds.
Yeah.
How, if at all, does this kind of money leverage federal funds?
Well, I think it helps us use it. So we have money from the Community Development Block Grant Program, as many of you know, because you approve those dollars to go out. We have administrative dollars and the ability to get the word out about that. We use a lot of money. We use all of our money in social services, which is 15% of those dollars. We have the physical improvement side of things. And so to the extent that we can get that money out the door for the Community Development Block Program has been pretty consistent over the years. We also have the Home Investment Partnership Program, which has down payment closing cost funds, can help toward new construction of affordable housing. When groups, Habitat for Humanity has been a big recipient of home dollars to help build some of their homes in Osage Place. So the more money, the more projects we can bring online that are in the realm of affordable housing can help leverage those dollars, especially where it comes to home. There are a lot of guidelines and a lot of provisions that have to be adhered to, certainly, but the more partners we can get online to develop affordable housing can leverage those home dollars especially.
But just to be clear, the more dollars we put in at the local level doesn't necessarily trigger additional federal dollars. It just helps make more sense of the federal dollars we're already getting.
I would say, yeah, the dollars, the home dollars and the CDBG dollars from HUD are based on a formula. So it doesn't, the increased investment that we would have locally, there's an equation that
a formula that includes,
helps calculate. I'm sorry, what was that?
A formula that includes tax dollars that we're putting in already, or is it just other variables?
No, it's I would say other variables. One of them is population-based, for instance. So we're what's called an entitlement community, and we get our money directly from HUD, as you probably know. So on the homeownership side, trying to get people new production, new homeownership units. As you know, we have a number of developments. The mayor mentioned the Hopewell development. We have the development off of Arlington Park Drive, where the city will get 45 lots that we would like to see home ownership in there, that a developer is developing all the infrastructure out and they're deeding over to the city those lots. We would like to see a lot of those homes be affordable. And on the rental side, the ability to attract projects to town, not just those that get low-income housing tax credit projects, the 9% projects like you'll see going in at Switchyard Park with the retreat project that most of you know about. Where can we get those projects online? How can the city help get those projects developed to respond to our goals, right? So we have the housing study that was done in 2020, which says that Bloomington needs another 2,592 housing units. Not all of those are affordable, mind you, but more housing. And when we see costs going up, how do we drive down the price so that we can get more people in affordable housing? And that all of those three buckets are working in tandem together to make sure that we're providing safe and affordable housing here, in addition to all the other things that HAND and the other city departments like ESD and planning do to help drive the housing bus, as I said, forward.
I like that metaphor, and I appreciate the deeper dive into that housing portion. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before you go, The term missing housing types, which actually is in the light item, is what seems to have triggered what we heard from some of the public. It's kind of a sounding an alarm that was a bit of a trigger, I think, for some folks. But just to assure anyone who has concerns about that, that's not necessarily meaning the same thing as a subsidy or incentivizing additional density in neighborhoods necessarily. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about what is meant by missing housing types? Where exactly, and I know you've done a really great explanation of what HAND will do and leveraging and the housing needs that are truly there for affordable and home ownership and all that good stuff. But missing housing types, what exactly does that mean?
I saw the mayor pop on. Let me defer to him real quick, and I'll be glad to answer additional questions there. Councilmember Mayor, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, just to give a couple examples. This is rumors, and there is no intent to fund or relitigate the issue that we went through with the zoning. And I'm sorry people wouldn't reach out and ask us about it. We'd be happy to talk about that, but thank you for asking. So examples of missing housing types, and it's really just a phrase to describe some of the work we're planning, but two examples. One, we just helped fund, actually through CDFI Friendly Bloomington, but also locally with housing, the co-op that is going to create housing for 18 people on Butler Park on 9th Street. That's a housing type that's not very common in Bloomington, but is creating really strong affordability for people through co-op housing. So this fund could be used to help strengthen the co-op housing effort to create that kind of housing type. Another example would be, well, gosh, I was thinking about another specific example that popped in my head, but I just got thinking about that 18 unit on Butler Park, and that got exciting. Another example, though, could be co-housing. We may want to encourage the development of co-housing, the smaller units with shared space that we think could be facilitated with some co-investment from us to help that. That could be done in Hopewell. That could be done in a particular location. It is meant to help explore. It could be looking at lower cost manufactured housing or pre-made housing or ADUs that we could facilitate. It's really just a concept that says, as we're working on those three buckets that Mr. Zodi talked about, let's think about how we can facilitate that kind of growth. It is not in any way meant to say there's going to be a tax fund that's dedicated on creating duplexes in core neighborhoods. That is not what it's about.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Zodi. Any further questions? Mr. Smith?
May I just say one additional thing, Councilmember Sandberg?
Yes.
Sorry, just to add to the mayor's point, I think what really eludes us a lot of times is that affordable home ownership, right? How do you get a new homeowner, a first-time homeowner, a young professional, a family of any income? How do you get them in a home to buy? And Habitat is one of the leaders of affordable home ownership, but who else? And how do we incentivize that and make sure that we are looking at that all across the city, not just in one area or here or there, it's everywhere. And that takes a lot. It's sometimes a one-off, one-piece effort, and it's a big one. On the rental side, I would say one missing piece, missing housing, is the workforce housing. We see a lot of 80, when you look at income bands, it's 80% of area median income and below, 120% of area median income, and the workforce housing band is something that we're really taking a keen look at. We have for a long time, but now that we see employers growing and hiring, it's certainly something that is big and on our plate. So I think we have to be very mindful of all types of affordable housing, and that includes that workforce housing where people are making a steady income that puts them in those upper brackets, but also makes housing tough because of where the market is here. So I'll leave it there.
Oh, again, thanks for the clarification. Councilmember Smith had a hand up, and then anyone else have a question?
I just wanted to ask, John, Mr. Zodi, you can respond to is if that phrase is really, bothering people in a way, can't we just put a comma and say, not for this kind of housing or not for this type of initiative, or delete it? because we're not seeing the final proposal right now, and when it comes to us, I mean, to allay people's concerns and worries about that, can we just not just like edit that document and take that out?
Well, Councilmember, I'm not sure I'm the best to answer this question because there could be, I want to make sure we're not sort of running afoul of anything that we, I'm not sure I'm the best to answer that question. Mayor, do you want to chime in there? And I'm not trying to be evasive, council member. I just want to be careful on how I phrase that.
Thank you, Mr. Zodi.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you for the question. I'm just looking at the phrase. I don't, if it's a problem, we can remove that phrase. It's just trying to give illustration that it could be used for some of that, but if it's, we're happy to talk about how to edit that, and I've tried to give assurance that it's not meant for that effort that some people have hypothesized it is. So happy to talk about changing that language.
Sure, sure. We just want to be responsive to people in the community.
Appreciate that.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Councilmember Rallo.
Yes, my next question is for Mr. Underwood, and it I'll refer to the 16% likely increase in property tax, 16% increase in property tax for assessed value estimate, and I wondered what the estimate in additional revenue that you anticipate with that tax increase. Or, I'm sorry, property assessed value increase. Thinking of two questions at once.
Again, we'll do a little property tax 101 here. There are two elements to the property tax rate. There is the levy, which is a portion of property taxes that every unit of government, almost every unit of government across the states receive. That is capped at a 5% growth. That is based on not assessed value, the growth in assessed value, but rather a 7-year rolling average of non-farm income in Indiana. And then whatever that percent works out to be, as long as it's not greater than 5%, is allowed for every unit of government in Indiana for the increase in their levy. So it has nothing to do with how you're doing locally, whether you're performing well, not performing well from an economic standpoint. So that we get that quotient from the state every year. It has 1 year will drop off and a year will get added on. The last few years, we've been in the 3.5% to 4% range on that. Assessed value is the denominator on that. So essentially, if your assessed value grows faster than the permitted increase in your levy, your tax rate will go down. If it does not, your tax rate will go up, and that gets spread out amongst all the AV. The other part of that is property tax caps, what those do to you. We're at about $500,000 in Bloomington. So growth in AV helps keep the cap down, which takes away from any increase in the levy that we may have. So we have had good to steady growth in our assessed value in Monroe County, and that helps to keep the property tax rates down because it spreads the levies that were all permitted across more dollars. So you could actually have a case where the levy did not increase at all, but if assessed value dropped, your property tax rate would go up. So the increase in assessed value does not necessarily equate into an increase in revenues.
I have another, but.
Are there any other questions? Why don't you go ahead, Councilmember Rallo?
Mr. Underwood, I just wondered if you, in terms of impact, trying to assess the impact of this tax on individuals in the community, in the county, and throughout the county. And I read today in the Herald Times that the hike would mean an extra approximately $430 for individuals or couples who, after varying deductions, have, a state-adjusted gross income of $50,000. Is that Does that comport with your estimation of the impact?
Yes, that would be relatively close.
Okay, thank you.
All right, at this point, if there are no further questions, I know last time we wanted an opportunity for maybe some final comments or just where we are. Is that the will of this council to end here? And I see a hand up from Councilmember Bowen.
I was going to say, I think that on a topic this momentous, we ought to expect that there's going to be some opportunities to rebut members. So this is a good opportunity tonight to have a real discussion, not simply a comment. Thank you.
So what is your pleasure at this point? To go around and ask people?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's-
right. So if there are no further questions, this is an opportunity for statements. Okay. Councilmember Rallo.
Just being very brief to start off, I'll just say that the proposed tax comes at a very poor time. I think that's been well stated. I think that we're looking at an economic downturn with stagnant wages and increase in inflation. Food prices are going up double digits now, I think at 13%. So people are feeling squeezed. They're having to tighten their belts, and I think it's incumbent on us to tighten our belts too, even if we're looking at this new tax, to make sure that other sources of revenue or funds and so forth can't be used for some of these expenditures. So, of course, an overriding concern driving me to adopt the tax is honoring the FOP contract. That is absolutely essential. We need to find that funding either in this tax or elsewhere. Maybe we can find it elsewhere. I haven't resolved whether we can or not yet. But there are other expenses. A new police station, I think, is essential. And that was part of the line of my questioning was intended to explore reducing the tax rate. So finding other sources of funds. Two possibilities was, it seems to me, the PS Lit. One possibility, to examine that closely and see if there isn't room to fund at least some of what's being asked for here from that. The other is CREED funds, which I see as available to us. They're not part of the reserves. They're not part of the rainy day funds. It's misinterpreted to say that it's part of our reserves. It's not. And they could be utilized, I think, to essentially as a means of reducing the principal for any debt obligation. So I think that needs to be explored. And what I discovered this evening is that those funds are transferable, and therefore they're not geographically required to be spent in a discrete geographic area, as the CREED is. So I'll leave it there for now. I still have more questions, and I'm happy to know that we have an extended period of time to consider this because it's very important. Thanks.
Thank you. Additional final statement for this evening. Councilmember Rosenberger.
Also keep it brief since I think I gave a general overview earlier. I'm still at the same place I was last week, that I think this is a good proposal from the mayor. The more I hear, the more I think it's justified and explained for that initial proposal. I think also, I hear what everyone up here is saying. I know I'm second to speak, but I know we've been talking a little bit, and I understand we're probably going to make some compromises here, and I think whatever we end up passing is going to be very thoughtful and also not necessarily easy, right? A tax isn't a thing that anyone is ever really excited to implement, and I think being in Indiana, it is true that all we have the option to do is a regressive tax, and I think potentially if we had the option to do a progressive tax, it would be a little easier to stomach. But that's why I think when considering this tax, especially for me, I really wanted to make sure that this money is going toward priorities that are going to make it easier and safer for people who really need help to live in Bloomington. So I think the big bucket categories here are just that. So a lot of folks commented tonight that, we need to make sure we're supporting the basics or what people really need here. And I don't think I could agree more with that. And I think that's what we're doing. I mean, public safety, climate preparedness, transit equity, quality of life, essential city services. I think these are all areas that, when you look at the line items are just like desperately needing some additional funding. So for me, I would say I'm being very careful in considering the tax. And, you know, we had some folks comment tonight, but there's so many more people out there. And like, I think about these stories of folks, like, of course, I'm very much into increasing transit and making it easier for people to ride and making it a way folks can get around town and just really complete like the, you know, their basic needs on a daily basis. And like something I've heard a lot is that folks have to take taxis from their work to a doctor's appointment and back because the buses don't run frequently enough. And like, that's a lot of time off work if you're hourly, and that's actually a lot of money if you're paying for 2 taxis. And so like the idea that someone would be able to take a bus and get back to work, you know, in a timely fashion, I think that's doing a lot for people who really need it. So I think that this tax really does weigh the needs of our community and allocates funding appropriately. And I just want to like reiterate that it isn't easy to tax, and I appreciate all the emails and the public comment. And even if this meeting, if parts of it have seemed a little duplicative, I think it still has been another good opportunity for us to continue this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Additional comment? Councilmember Sims.
Smith Sims, President of County.
I'm telling you.
Yes, thank you. I'll be brief as well. First of all, compromising is essential to arrive at acceptable common ground. I think that's been a common mantra, and particularly from me and some of my colleagues, since I've sat amongst my honorable colleagues all these years. Now, having said that, I've had some folks say zero tax. We don't need it. We don't want it. I've had other folks say we need the full tax. Where are we in there? Where can we arrive at that's acceptable and that will meet some of our future needs? I think it's pretty clear to me. One of the things that I'm looking for is public safety, and particularly the FOP contract and how do we fund that. Essential city services is next. From a priority standpoint, I think you would be naive not to understand that all 4 buckets have something that is essential and I think needed in this city. We just have to figure out how to get there. Obviously, we can't do everything in every bucket if we also want to reduce the amount of the tax. So that's where we are, or where I am. I appreciate innovation and some of the things that I've heard, and particularly in housing and some of the ideas we have on the table. One of the things I'd like to hear, and we have some very good programs, and I'd like to see them become more robust. For an example, and we'll talk more about this next week or in a comment or comments, but for an example, the home buyers class. I mean, that is a good program. And some of the funding that we're talking about this evening can be used to be part of that to help with down payments, and particularly in home ownership. Yeah, there's missing housing and there's all that, but one of the darts in this community is home ownership. And I mean, we've got some programs for that. We've also got 45 lots out on Arlington that the city owns. And that in and of itself reduces the cost of housing. So that's one way of doing that. But instead of housing, and I don't know how many people are in the home buyers class annually or every year. Mr. Zodi could touch on that. I'm guessing 6 or 8 families, maybe. I don't know. Yes. But if we were going to have an impact on something like that, we could triple that number with some of the fundings that we're talking. I mean, and we've got the property. There's other things we need to work out, but more innovative and more robust than some of the things that we've already doing, so we don't have to really recreate the wheel. So we'll talk more about that moving forward, and it's what can we compromise on. There's some climate mitigation activity that's very important and that we must consider. But again, I'll repeat, we cannot do, if we reduce the tax, we cannot do everything that's being proposed. So what is the priority? What is the compromise? And what can we all live with? And that's all I'll say this evening, and we'll talk more about that. I do want to thank the public and my colleague for the questions, and some of the administrations and staff for their input, and in particular our public comment. It's been very, very helpful. And I do believe we'll get there. The final thing I will say, it is pretty clear, I think, well, clear to me, and I think most of us will agree that there is some form of lit increase that's needed. I think the issue is how much and how impactful is it going to be for the wide variety of those in our community. And that's kind of what I'm focusing on. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sims. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. Local income tax is certainly a way to bring more money into the city. Current proposal under consideration is to raise the lit 0.855, which will annually bring in about $18 million and change. You know, conceptually, there's a lot to like in the proposal: public safety, social equity, police salaries, climate mitigation, essential services, but maybe too much. Do we need that much? I don't know. Maybe a better question is, do we need a lit at all? I don't know the answer to that question either. The lit proposal was initially offered with language in it that we had to have a way to pay for the police increase in their negotiated contract. The contract was negotiated between the city and the police union. I absolutely support the idea of raising the salaries of the police in the community, but I do object to the apparent efforts to shift the blame to the city council if we don't pass the lit and then the negotiated contract isn't able to be funded because the lit's voted down. You know, this is kind of nonsense, and I reject the implication that that's kind of where it's at. It'd be a travesty not to honor that contract, even if the lit's voted down. And that's why I kept asking about PS Lit. I know that's why other colleagues had done that as well. I kind of feel like I'm being backed into a corner as a city council member. I'm not really that happy about it. It's the job of the mayor to manage the city and to plan for these personnel trends and not to blame the city council. The sky is not falling. No one's hair's on fire. There's no Chicken Little. We can take more time for the city, county, Ellettsville, Steinsville to weigh on this proposal. Why don't we do this together? I'm not sure it's a unilateral idea is such a great idea. A unilateral proposal. You know, the problem I'm having with the proposal, it's too broad. Includes a lot of wish lists. There's a lot of really important things on it. There's a lot of great things on it. The other issue is the county's not being brought in on it. So if we vote 9-0 or 8-1, we just cut out everybody's vote except ours. I don't feel that comfortable with that as a city council member, as a member of the community, the broader community. This doesn't seem right. Should we have some kind of city council, maybe series of meetings, or at least some more robust discussion? Because at this point, I've checked with some of my county colleagues, and we're really not doing it. I cannot support the lit proposal as it is in its current form. It must be leaner, more focused, and more collaborative. We need to try to live within our budget. I've had conversations about the lit with county officials, former administration staff, former mayor, friends, family members, constituents, and a waiter at the Uptown Cafe this morning. I'd like to suggest that we just focus our efforts on finding other ways to do some of these things than the current 0.855 lit proposal. There really is no rush right now. We can discuss this with the county and other parties. It shouldn't be a unilateral effort. I really do appreciate all my fellow council members' questions, comments, and their passion about what they believe in. And this is really important. So I look forward to further reducing and refining this proposal, and I thank everyone for all their input that I've received from community members, staff, and colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment? Councilmember Boland.
Last week, I was talking about transit and some of the other aspects of this proposal, and I said the Field of Dreams phrase, build it and they will come. And I was told by my colleagues, you don't build it and hope they will come. Well, if that's true, why do we build the Trade Center garage? Isn't that literally the point of the Trade Center garage? It's maybe 10% full. It was built I voted for it, under the assumption that there was going to be private development in the area around Maker Way, and that it was more efficient for them to not have to build their own parking in each building, to have it separately in one garage. But the only development that's going towards economic development there is now being pioneered by the city. The city's about to build a new building there. Are we not literally building that building hoping that they will come, despite there being zero guarantee of success? If this tax is a leap of faith, it's no different than every other investment that we've used tax dollars for, at least economic development-wise. The administration, I think, has done a pretty good job of showing what the city's needs are. I also heard the phrase that this tax had an eye-popping price tag. I think that that's sort of a selectively used phrase as well. A $10 million garage isn't an eye-popping price tag. The $660,000 a year that we transfer to pay for the 7th Street and Morton Street garages that we've been doing for 20 years isn't itself an eye-popping price tag. TIF dollars that could have gone to the priorities being discussed tonight are instead still paying for those garages. And anyone can see that despite the fact that the food and beverage tax is now exceeding any previous amounts that were amassed before the pandemic, the garages aren't full. Not every street in town is packed full of cars, despite the fact that we're charging $1 an hour. You know, it's all a matter of priorities, and it's clear that there are certain members who would cut the single greatest innovation in public transit in the city's history, short of the establishment of BT itself, maybe can't wrap their heads around what an enormous leap of faith, what an enormous opportunity this would-be leap of faith in transit is. I'm not sure why anyone would oppose the east-west high-frequency route. Maybe they're having trouble imagining themselves using it. Why can people imagine using a parking garage but not a bus? Should we only be voting for things that we can imagine ourselves using? I used to hear for years and years, in fact, it was back in 2004, that I had a reason to do, I mean, I remember hearing Councilmember Mayer, former colleague Councilmember Mayer, talk about how people in Bloomington lamented there not being a quick way to get from Kmart to Kmart. There was a Kmart on the east side and a Kmart on the west side. They're both gone now. But the shopping areas that represent Whitehall Crossing and College Mall are part of the logic of the route proposed by this tax, let alone what a bargain all the transit investments are because of the Federal Transit Administration. They match capital costs 80-20. If we buy an electric bus, we get 5 of them. The approval of this portion of the tax alone for transit represents pretty much a doubling of BT's budget at minimum. Once we get the federal dollars that will be triggered by the local spending that we're proposing here, that the administration is proposing. This is the greatest potential event in the history of local transit since the establishment of BT itself. We are unlikely to have a better opportunity to make our transit dollars go farther than the Biden administration in 2022. We've also known since 2017 that the one department that would see no significant budget increase from annexation is Bloomington Transit. So transit increases the affordability of housing. It increases the number of housing units that are affordable among the existing stock without building anything new. Mr. Zodi used this great metaphor. How do we drive the housing bus forward? Well, the answer is you put more money into buses and you make housing more affordable. The simple fact is it costs more to run a city with the quality of life that we have than our long-ago predecessors in the city and the state contemplated. When Governor Bowen froze our property tax rate in 1973, when we were at one of the lowest rates in the state. If we're struggling to fund public safety, it goes back that far. How much does it cost to create a fire department that has an ISO rating of 1? Well, we're getting to the point now where we realize it costs more than we contemplated even 15 years ago, let alone 50. The mayor's been making this case literally for his entire term. And the administration is saying if you make us pay what we all know it costs to provide these basic services at the level that we expect, only with the various streams of tax revenue that the state has grudgingly allowed us, what whole departments are we going to cut to fund public safety without this increase in investment? I'd like to hear which departments would get the axe if we don't pass the tax. Maybe parks, maybe community and family resources. I mean, are they really essential? Maybe we should just cut planning. I want to paraphrase Jane Martin's fear that we're borrowing from the future. I disagree with her. We are the future. We are the future that Governor Bowen borrowed from. This is what it really costs to run a city as expensive as the one that we all love. We've heard the BEDC and the Chamber both endorse a high-speed line that will go across town. I still can't believe, even with the reduced amount, that we would think about cutting that amount any more than we would cut the police salaries. And this is a commitment I want to make tonight because it's been a source of confusion for a while. When the county is willing to pay its very modest share, and it would be maybe if we had still had the $2.1 million cost that the BT initially assumed for the east-west route, it probably would have cost, we heard from Mr. Connell in Transit, about $250,000 to extend that service from Whitehall Crossing to Cook and Ivy Tech. When the county is willing to pay that very modest share, let's call it $200,000 or less out of the $1.7 million that we would invest, I would be happy to author the legislation permitting Bloomington Transit to serve select areas outside the city. In fact, I have draft legislation prepared to show the county council that I mean what I say. If we approve this tax, they're going to have the money to devote this modest amount, and we will all benefit. I mean, this is a vital, long-discussed and sought-after goal to let Bloomington Transit serve outside the city. And we're limited by statute to not do that unless the council approves it. This is the condition under which I'd approve it, and this is a great way for the city and county to collaborate for what would be the ultimate delivery of the promise of the Kmart to Kmart route. I've advocated a separate 25-cent lit increase devoted exclusively to transit. I wish we could do it in the same way that there have been discussions tonight about certified chairs and moving public safety expenses to the PS lit exclusively. But I think anything less than what the mayor has proposed for transit misses the plot. I'm happy to bind public safety salaries with a historic increase in transit for the area, not just for the city. There's never a good time to raise a tax, it seems. The two times in my career when I would have agreed with the sentiment would have been the recession budget years of 2009 and 2010, when Mayor Kruzan came to us with a flat budget. He was right. Like, we didn't have any room for any additional changes. We were lucky to not have to cut employees and staff in that time. And the second was last year, the pandemic year of 2021. Even then, the pandemic was not as acute financially as the recession was. Again, one small indicator is that food and beverage tax, which has rebounded to exceed pre-pandemic levels. This has been a much better debate and process than the mayor's initial proposal last year. It's been thoughtful and more detailed within the limits that we are forced to observe by the state. I agree with Councilmember Rosenbarger that I would go the full amount, and I expect my colleagues to be very specific in their justifications for what they would cut and why they would cut it, whether it be minor cut across the board or cutting certain line items. I don't think we're done yet debating what things should be cut, if they insist that things that should be cut. But I would ask all my colleagues to consider, are you cutting for the sake of cutting because somehow we're charging too much tax, or are you cutting specifically because you don't think certain services are worthy of it? There's not a right or wrong answer there, but I really do expect more specifics from my colleagues who would propose to cut a proposal from the administration that has been very carefully considered, I think. Thank you. Sorry for the extended comment.
Thank you. Additional comments to my left. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, thank you. I don't have anything prepared, so hopefully I won't fumble too much. But I think that this proposal for a lit increase represents a very important new stream of revenue for the city. As my colleague, Councilmember Volan, said, the city is, in order to uphold the high quality of life that we value here in Bloomington, it takes more money than it did 30 years ago. Not only that, but I would specifically call out two things that we must invest money in. And one is the opioid epidemic and the general spread of drug misuse among our residents and accompanying homelessness that have really led to an increase in people who need our assistance as a community to get back and become productive members of society. And that, I think that need has always been with us, certainly since the 80s, since the mental health hospitals closed. But it's become much more pronounced with the prevalence of drugs that we've seen in the last 15 years. And I do think our community wants us to act upon it. That was shown by the city surveys we've done the last few years. The other is climate change. I mean, 30 years ago, certainly the science was there and telling us to do something, but now it's, a red alert every day. We get a new stark warning from scientists that we must act, we must change the way we live in order to avoid catastrophe. And I think that comes right down to local governments. As a city, we must change the way we do business as a city of Bloomington. And we have a very comprehensive, detailed climate action plan that we must implement. And we don't have another funding source to do that. And there's, we received feedback from Ms. Lauren Clemens on some of the ways in which that $1.75 million that's proposed in this lit proposal could be spent. And, it could be twice as much because we have so many items that we need to focus on. Everything from, expanding solar and energy efficiency loan program that's now funded by ARPA, and that ARPA money is going to go away. And this is a way that low-income individuals can fund solar on their homes and increase the energy efficiency and reduce their utility bills. All the way to, funding increased tree canopy to mitigate the heat island effect. We've put some investment there with bicentennial bond funds, but those are running out soon as well. So if we want long-term extended commitments to climate action, as is in our adopted plans, we must have a new revenue source. And this, I think, makes the lit increase essential. I agree also with Councilmember Volin about the importance of transit, and this is also, of course, related to climate change. The transportation sector is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. We must get out of the mindset that success means having your own car that you can go anywhere you want, anytime you want. And we can only get there if we have a transit system that is easy and convenient to use for those so-called choice riders, people who could have a car but choose not to, or choose not to use it as often. And for that, we need a significant investment in transit. We also need a huge marketing campaign saying, hey, transit is new. Transit is not, this is not your mommy's transit. This is a new deal. And I think to do that, we need these investments that the mayor has spelled out. The east-west express route, the Sunday service, which is especially important for people who work on Sundays, which we have a lot of in the community. The increased paratransit and microtransit options, the increased frequency to at least 30 minutes, I would say 20 minutes. These are all essential to get us as a community away from that single occupancy vehicle use and follow through on our climate commitments. So for these reasons, I support the lit increase. I do foresee that some compromises are coming down the pike to get anything passed, and I regret that, but I understand that's what we're going to have to do. But I also would like to hear from colleagues who are opposed to the lit increase, how are we going to lead in climate action? How are we going to change the way help people change the way they live to a more climate conscious way without these investments? And specifically, what would you cut? Show me what you would cut from this proposal. Because in addition to the transit and the climate action, I think the public safety investments are essential. I think the housing investments are essential. And I think it's essential that we maintain and retain our highly qualified staff with increased salaries. So I'm looking to my colleagues, and I hope to hear, what would you cut out of these very worthy programs? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No comment? Councilmember Rallo?
I don't have more comments to share tonight. I shared my thoughts fairly extensively at our first consideration of this. We'll be having more meetings, and especially since we won't be taking final action tonight with one of our colleagues missing. I just look forward to continued discussion with colleagues.
Thank you. Councilmember Rallo.
Just in response, just a very interesting, good conversation. I think transit is very important. In fact, I do find it very attractive because it meets several different aspects of sustainability. That is, it reduces greenhouse gases, of course. It works to provide people with transportation who don't have cars, and it prevents road widening because you don't need as much to facilitate more cars if you have good public transportation and so forth. So, and in addition to that, the ability to leverage federal funds, I think, is a really important aspect of investing in public transit. So I'm very sensitive to that. I think that in terms of climate, we just passed millions of dollars in bonds last week that do apply to climate action, and we are working on climate action in other respects. But I want to say that inflation is likely to remain elevated. Many experts expect that. Current inflation hasn't been seen like this since 1982. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimate it's an additional $3,500 impact on the average household budgets in this country. Housing costs continue to increase in the community in Bloomington and Monroe County. Food costs are higher than the 8.5% average inflation rate, running at about 13%. This tax is borne disproportionately on lower income residents. So that has to be taken into account in terms of the degree to which we're willing to commit to tax at this time. Yes, is there a good time to raise taxes? I don't know. I think so. I think this is a very poor time, and I think it can be argued that it is a poor time, and we've heard from various representatives, for instance, from the Chamber and elsewhere, that it is. So this weighs on me, and I'm happy. I think I agree with Councilmember Smith that we need to take our time at this. We need to examine this closely. We need to make sure that we're tightening our belt as a city, because other people are tightening their belts as we speak. That said, absolutely essential that we honor the contract, that we remain competitive in terms of our police salaries with other communities if we're going to have the excellent police force that we've had and are able to maintain. So I'll end it there. I look forward to speaking to my colleagues over the next week or more, hopefully.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Boland.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation and Mr. Rallo's comments now. And he says it's a poor time to raise a tax, but there's literally a line item in the fourth bucket proposed by the administration that would make up for the spiking costs of supplies and equipment that departments are facing, partly due to inflation. Again, if we don't do this, then we have to start making choices in the 2023 budget about what we're going to cut in order to pay for those expenses. And that's a valid position, but it's not been forthcoming so far in the words of my colleagues who are saying that there need to be some cuts. And that's why I'm very eager for my colleagues to be more specific about what they would do. And I wanted to address Mr. Smith as well. I think that he forgets that the county and the other taxing units in the county will be getting their own dedicated sums separate from anything we've been debating here that the city would get. So again, the state set the very restrictive terms that we're working under. And we're not in a county where no city has a majority of the population. These are the rules that the state set. It so happens that there are so many people who live in Bloomington that they represent a majority of the county. If that majority were smaller, if it was, say, 52% of the county, we'd be having a slightly different conversation. Even though we're the majority, it would be a bare majority. It might take all 9 members to approve, and we would, if any one member. So it's just a matter of, the state also changed the rule about how we would allocate that percentage. So instead of a majority of 5 being able to allocate 58%, they gave it to each of us individually. The state has actually reacted to that perception that somehow a small minority is making a decision for everybody. And I think the state is going to keep reacting to it. But cities, like any other government entity, they can't sit still. They can't wait until later. I hear this all the time. Well, now is not the time. People are suffering. That's always been true. That's been true every time we have this debate. Again, this isn't the recession of 2009 and 10. As bad as things are, the positive words that every member has said here about the investments that we need to make, I think, make the case for this tax. That this is really the kind of money that we should have been spending all along on our city, that for decades and decades, this community is really successful. We had it good for so long. From the year I moved here, it was well known that rents were cheap for decades. It was affordable to live here, but the market caught on to the desire. Our investments have paid off so much that the market has caught on and caught up, and now we're paying premiums for rent across the board. All the areas where new single-family neighborhoods could be built have been built out. It doesn't matter that they didn't contribute to the density that would have enabled public transit. But now on the periphery of the city, districts 2, 3, 4, and 5, we've got neighborhoods of single-family housing, all in cul-de-sacs. They're not they're not easy to service by buses. So, I mean, if there's nothing else, this debate has woken us up to the realization that Bloomington is not a sleepy small town anymore, you know? And the things that we're so proud of, the mayor has talked about how we are the only CALIA certified police department with an ISO 1 department in the state, okay? Well, we now see the price of that. And that's one reason why we're debating the taxes. We know that there's no way to get those revenues without cutting some of the other services that made this city so desirable. And, you know, I look at Carmel and Fishers and Nobleville, and I find their tax rates obscene, and the amount of money that they raise obscene. I don't know how they do it, but, you know, that's a story for another day. We pale in comparison to them. This tax will put us squarely in the middle of the road. So, like, I would just urge all my colleagues to think twice about how they express their concern for such a tax that I think most people have acknowledged that we have certain needs, and yet those who would cut the tax haven't really done enough of a job to say what specifically needs to be cut. And I'm very eager to have that conversation. I really appreciate the chance for you to spend a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there's no further comment, my job this evening was to preside and to listen. I've appreciated all the good questions and the answers, and I'm grateful that I do believe we're going to have a motion here to postpone so that we'll have an additional week to do more.
Madam President, I move to postpone Resolution 2209 to the Council's May 4th regular session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Do we need any debate on this?
It must be seconded, is debatable, amendable, and requires a majority to pass.
All right. Any further comment on the motion to postpone? All right. Seeing none, will we call upon our clerk to call the roll on the motion to postpone?
Okay, Councilmember Rosenbarger? Yes. Bolin?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Flaherty's gone. Smith?
Yes.
And Piedmont Smith.
All right, and that motion passes, and so that should conclude our business this evening. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you so much.